Jennifer Murtazashvili is an associate professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. Jennifer, welcome to the programme. I'd said at the top of the programme that part of the reason the Afghan people are suffering so much is the international community refuses still to recognise the Taliban as the country's legitimate government. Is it now time to help the Afghan people and give that recognition?
I still think it's quite premature to recognize the government. And let's also remember that the United States and other donors struggled mightily to provide aid and assistance to Afghanistan over the past 20 years. So although these problems seem, they're quite devastating because so much of the economy has collapsed, aid is just one part of this equation. And in order for the economy to recover, the borders have to open, trade has to resume, and this, economic growth through small businesses, through the private sector that has been Afghanistan's source of income over the past 20 years really has to resume as well. Aid can be part of it, but until the economy normalizes through more open borders, we're going to continue to see this kind of situation.
Yeah, I absolutely fully accept that. I was going to ask you what needs to happen in the country itself for things to become better. But I just want to ask you one more question about recognition and how much more difficult is the Taliban itself making that international recognition? I mean, older girls are still not allowed to go to school. Critics are being detained. I mean, there was one video on social media that showed the Taliban sawing off the heads of female mannequins because they're so uncomfortable with the female form. I mean, this is a mannequin in a shop window.
I mean, it is symbolically devastating. The arrest of Professor Jalal, he was released this morning, I've heard. This is devastating to any kind of hope for a more inclusive government. And I think it's very clear that the Taliban do not plan on a more inclusive government. I think the only thing that we can hope for is sort of incremental changes from the bottom up, from the inside. But the international community has had very little leverage on the previous Afghan government, on the Taliban. I think that the international community is going to have to make a choice. Are they willing to provide assistance to Afghanistan to save these starving children, or is politics more important? And that is ultimately a choice that's in front of the U.S. and the UN right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Did the U.S. set some kind of precedent here that the rest of the world could follow by making it easier for international organizations to do their work in Afghanistan? And if they had to deal with the Taliban, there would be some kind of mechanism in place that meant they weren't breaking American sanctions. That happened towards the end of December, didn't it?
Yes, it did. There were more licenses given for humanitarian aid. Today, the USAID announced that it would be providing more than $300 million of aid to Afghanistan. So the United States has figured out how to give aid to Afghanistan and going around the Taliban. But frankly, the United States and other aid agencies have been going around the government for years, so it shouldn't be too hard to do this. The mechanisms are in place, and it seems very hard for the United States to willing to accept that it lost in Afghanistan and provide this aid, its continued aid to Afghanistan. The economy there, we know that the U.S. provided almost 80% of that country's government's budget before this. And this wasn't always through direct budget assistance. This was through NGOs and third parties. And so many of those third parties are ready to go and to continue doing their work. But a big question I have is, we haven't learned the lessons of the past 20 years. So many of these aid efforts were not effective. And right now we're looking at aid as the only solution to this massive famine. And I am not convinced that the current modalities that we have are going to help the people of Afghanistan the way they need to be helped. We haven't had a chance to pause and really rethink all of this.
It was printed too early.
I'm sorry?
Jennifer, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Jennifer Murtazashvili speaking to us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.